The Great Barrier Reef by Cynthia Kennedy Henzel. Beneath the Pacific Ocean lies a huge structure that resembles a busy city. The structure's walls are made of reefs. Holes and cracks in the walls house millions of sea creatures. Night and day, the Great Barrier Reef is a busy place. Like a city, this place is not one solid structure. It is made up of nearly 3,000 individual reefs. There are also hundreds of islands. The Great Barrier Reef lies off the coast of Queensland and northeastern Australia. It stretches from a point near Bundaberg, Queensland, to the Torres Strait. That is about 1,250 miles. The reef lies between 10 and 100 miles away from Australia's coast. At its widest point, it extends 45 miles across. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest reef system in the world. Its amazing plants and animals make it a natural treasure. UNESCO officials recognized the importance of the Great Barrier Reef by naming it a World Heritage Site. That will help preserve this special place for years to come. The Great Barrier Reef is the largest structure ever built by living organisms, yet it was not made by humans. Creatures known as coral polyps formed it. These animals are related to jellyfish and sea anemones. One end of a polyp's tiny tube-like body attaches to a surface. At the other end, tentacles surround its mouth. These gather food. Coral polyps form either hard or soft corals. When many polyps of the same type attach to one another, they form a colony. Some colonies look like feathery fans. Others resemble plates, antlers, or brains. Tiny algae called zooxanthellae live in the tissue of healthy polyps. Algae give many corals their color. When healthy, corals are usually green or brown. Without algae, most are white. Polyps also get much of their food from the algae. The algae use the sun's energy to make food, so most coral colonies grow in the shallow water. There, the sun can reach the algae. Both hard and soft coral polyps live in the Great Barrier Reef. However, hard corals are mainly responsible for forming the reef. To form hard corals, polyps draw in specks of limestone from the water. This helps them build a hard outer skeleton. As coral colonies develop, their skeletons attach to one another. This creates the coral shapes we recognize. When polyps die, they leave behind their skeletons. The colonies continue to build on these remains. This growth slowly forms a reef. Over time, sand and mud fills holes in the structure. Materials from other animals drop there as well. Eventually, all this compresses into great limestone walls. It took millions of corals many years to build the Great Barrier Reef. In the north, much of the base is about 18 million years old. Most of the Great Barrier Reef's recent structure formed within the last 6,000 years. Corals form many interesting shapes. In fact, they are often named for those shapes. Can you guess which common name belongs to each of these hard corals? Which one do you think is a brain coral? The one that kind of looks like a brain. Which one do you think is a staghorn coral? The one that looks like horns, maybe. And which one do you believe is a table coral? The one that somewhat resembles a table. People have lived near the Great Barrier Reef for thousands of years. Aborigines are the native people of Australia. Most likely, they were the first to discover the reef. In 1522, the first European saw the Great Barrier Reef. He was a Portuguese captain, Cristóvão de Mendonça. Then in 1770, British captain James Cook led the first European exploration there. Cook and his crew charted much of the area. Eventually, the Great Barrier Reef became a site of scientific interest. In 1842, geologist J.B. Jukes arrived. He spent 4 years studying the area. Then, in 1928, Great Britain started the Great Barrier Reef expedition. Charles Maurice Young led 12 other scientists to Australia. There they conducted research for about 1 year. Young studied reef construction and reef life. This research had not been done before. His work was a big step for marine science. The Great Barrier Reef is full of amazing wildlife. About 1,500 species of fish call the reef home. That is more than any other marine habitat. Marine mammals such as dolphins and whales can also be found there. Dugongs grow 7 to 11 feet long and weigh 500 to 925 pounds. These large, shy animals can live for 73 years. In this underwater wonderland, there are thousands of squid, octopuses, and shelled animals. Numerous giant clams live there. Some live up to 70 years. Many smaller creatures can also be found in the Great Barrier Reef. These include shrimp, crabs, sea snakes, and starfish, and there are about 1,500 types of sponges. The most recognized residents are the corals. About 400 species live in the Great Barrier Reef. Even with such large numbers, these creatures still face danger. A coral's most serious predator is the crown of thorns. This starfish can grow up to 18 inches across. Sometimes large groups attack. They can destroy reefs by eating coral faster than they can grow. The Great Barrier Reef is more than an underwater wonderland. It also includes many islands. They are grouped into two types. The larger islands are the tops of underwater mountains. The smaller islands formed from corals that grew above the water. Over time, waves broke down the corals into sand. The islands provide homes and nesting sites for many animals. 6 types of sea turtles are found among the islands. They commonly nest on Rain Island. Hundreds of bird species live on the islands too. These include pelicans, cormorants, and silver gulls. Boobies, tropical petrels, and other seabirds also visit. Plants provide food and shelter for animals. Mangrove trees line many shores. Their roots grow deep down into the water and tangle beneath the surface. Underwater, beds of seagrass grow between the islands and throughout the Great Barrier Reef. Dugongs and other animals graze there too. And this is a dugong right here. The world's largest population of dugongs lives in the Great Barrier Reef. The Great Barrier Reef is home to countless plants and animals. These features attract many people, but too many visitors can cause problems. Tourism developed in the area in the 1980s. Many hotels were built along the reef. Even an airport was added. To make room for these structures, some natural landforms were destroyed. Today, more than 2 million tourists visit every year. All these people put stress on the Great Barrier Reef. Visitors may frighten nesting animals. Careless swimmers and wanderers can easily break corals. Boats create noise and water pollution, and the water can even be polluted from too much sunscreen. Still, there are some simple ways to enjoy the Great Barrier Reef responsibly. For example, visitors should not litter on the reef. Garbage can harm all animals, including corals. People should also respect native species. This means moving carefully around corals and not touching or feeding other animals. Over the years, people have created environmental problems for the Great Barrier Reef. Oil spills and other accidents have occurred there. Fishing has lowered fish numbers, nets harm animals, and boat anchors damage corals. These threats have upset the natural conditions of the water. The way Australians use land can also cause serious problems. Agriculture and other industries add chemicals to the ground. These substances enter rivers and flow to the ocean. This changes the natural balance of the reef's ecosystem. In addition, bits of dirt and other materials flow into the rivers. When it reaches the ocean, the water there becomes cloudy. This blocks out the sunlight that corals and algae need to survive. People must remember that their actions on land affect life in the Great Barrier Reef. Now, Australia's creatures face a more serious threat. This threat affects reefs around the world. It also affects polar regions, deserts, and rainforests. This threat is climate change. The Earth is gradually growing warmer. Climate change is not new. The Earth's climate has changed in the past, but today change is happening much faster than before. Global warming may be caused partly by human activity, such as air pollution. Cars and businesses release a gas called carbon dioxide into the air. When this gas enters the atmosphere, it traps heat from the sun, so the land and water temperatures rise. It takes many years for animals and plants to adapt to change. If they cannot do this fast enough, they may die. So, global warming threatens life in the Great Barrier Reef and beyond. In the Great Barrier Reef, climate change causes several problems. The ocean absorbs carbon dioxide, which changes conditions in the water. Then, coral polyps are unable to form skeletons. Another problem is rising sea levels. As glaciers melt, the water flows into the sea. In recent years, Australia's waters have risen slowly, yet most corals cannot survive in water deeper than 100 feet. If the ocean becomes deeper than this, the sun will not reach the algae, and then the corals will die. Corals are also sensitive to changes in temperature. Water temperatures must be between 60 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. If the ocean gets too warm, corals become stressed, and then the algae leave. When this happens, the corals look white. This is called coral bleaching. If ocean conditions return to normal quickly, bleached coral can recover. Still, this may take years. If corals remain stressed, they will die. In 1998 and 2002, ocean temperature increases affected much of the Great Barrier Reef. On average, about 60% of the reef bleached. About 5% suffered serious damage. Over the years, many people have recognized Australia's reef is special. In 1922, the Great Barrier Reef Committee formed. It set out to promote research and protection of the area. By 1972, the Australian Institute of Marine Science was founded. This group works to understand and protect the reef. Their research supports many industries that use the area. Then, in 1975, the Australian government took action. It formed the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. It also established the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority to monitor activities there. The government of Queensland manages the Park Authority. To protect the future of the Great Barrier Reef, UNESCO officials made it a World Heritage Site in 1981. This site includes almost 135,000 square miles. This makes it the largest World Heritage Site. Look, it's a clownfish. Isn't he cute? Today, many conservation programs help protect the Great Barrier Reef. For example, the Bleach Watch program encourages visitors to report bleaching. This helps scientists study the effects of climate change. For better protection, the Great Barrier Reef is divided into zones. Certain activities are allowed in specific areas. These include fishing, tourism, shipping, and research. Activities such as mining and oil drilling are not allowed anywhere. In 2004, the Australian government introduced laws that create no-take zones. Nothing can be removed from these areas. Today, 33% of the Great Barrier Reef is protected this way. The Great Barrier Reef Climate Change Action Plan promotes practices that reduce stress on the area. Australia's communities are working to limit global climate change, but efforts from countries around the world are also needed. For many years, studying the Great Barrier Reef was difficult. People could not easily conduct research underwater. Scientists collected sea creatures and plants. Then they studied them in laboratories. There was no way to learn how these organisms lived underwater. Then, in the 1940s, scuba diving was invented. For the first time, people could swim underwater for long periods. This gave scientists new opportunities. Before 1960, only about 50 scientists had visited the Great Barrier Reef. With scuba diving, real exploration could begin. Today, scientists have many questions. They want to discover how fast the climate is changing, and they want to know how species will adapt to change. The Great Barrier Reef is the perfect classroom for studying global warming. That is because it is sensitive to this change. What scientists learn there helps us to protect other ecosystems too. Protecting this natural treasure today will help preserve it for the future. I've never been to the Great Barrier Reef, and I would very much like to go. So I hope we can preserve it. Thanks for joining me today, and have a good day.